Hello. Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. But to speak after that, after those three, and right before lunch, is really pressuring for me. But thank you so much, Karen, for inviting me to this wonderful crowd of people, allowing me to speak alongside such distinguished speakers, not only today but yesterday. I am deeply humbled by this opportunity, and it is a great honor and privilege to stand here before such freedom-loving patriots in the United States and such great freedom fighters from Europe. So thank you. These are two pictures, but they have all destroyed my presentation, so everything is repeated here. But there's the picture of South Korea from at night. When I heard John talk about Monica, I thought there are 25 million Monicas still there in that dark spot. And they all need our attention as long as we are freedom fighters. And the picture on the right is, of course, Lawrence showed a video of it shortly, but that's a part of the movement that's going on by the conservatives. You don't hear them in the media, but it's going on. This just happened last Wednesday. Wow. Yeah. And there's another one next Wednesday. And it has been happening every week. You don't hear about it because the major media in Korea, especially the ones who translate Korean articles into English, they're all left. They're all pro-moon. As the last speaker of this session on Korea, I want to talk about two things. First, I want to share in particular about some of the leftist attacks on freedom in schools and universities, college campuses against our children and the younger generations. I myself am part of an intercollegiate conservative organization, first of its kind in Korea, but that's not the only reason I want to talk about it. I believe it is the same here in Korea, in the US, but the left's ideological indoctrination begins from school campuses. They prey on children as easy targets, and they feed on the raw passions of college students. Secondly, I want to address the American conservatives here in this audience to explain why you should care, particularly about freedom in Korea. Why should Americans care about that little Asian peninsula? What is Korea, or what should Korea mean to America and the conservative movement? After all, you have your own problems, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Ilhan Omar to deal with. But I want to make the case that Korea is as important for American conservatives today, not only because of the history of your sacrifice during the Korean War, or the strategic role it could play in countering the China threat, but also because South Korea's conservative foundation is very close to that of the United States. I want to make the case that, in fact, South Korea is the only country to have modeled its political system exclusively after the American founding and its experiment. But the first question first, what's happening in South Korean universities and schools? The three speakers before me have already done such a marvelous job in presenting the current civil war taking place in Korea between the freedom-loving patriots and the pro-North Korean National Socialists, i.e. Nazis. That's the familiar German abbreviation of the term. In particular, our good friend Lawrence Pak has wonderfully explained how the current dominance of the left in Korea came to be since the 1980s, when Marx-Leninist and North Korean ideology followers, or Jusapa, have perniciously infiltrated our ranks, spying on the freedom we enjoy as a liberal democracy to make us slaves under totalitarian Kim dynasty. But how on earth did it come to this? Having experienced the communist invasion less than a generation ago, and having lived through the constant fear of another attack from the Kim regime, how was it possible for us to forget that what is at stake and put down our guards against totalitarianism? Well, as our favorite president famously said, freedom is indeed no more than a generation away from extinction. It doesn't flow through our veins. And the long march against the institutions, the leftist attack on our freedom, really began targeting our children and the young students in Korea. The hijacking of the Korean liberals and progressives by the pro-North Korean sympathizers in the 1980s began in Korean universities under the very fashionable disguise of the so-called democratic movement. against our authoritarian governments. There's a picture that I want to show you. Lawrence actually talked about Lim Jong-seok, the chief of staff of Moon, and he was actually the movement leader, university movement, democratic movement leader on the far right, top right. He was the chief of staff. He's running for parliament next year in April. But he was not just a student activist, but he had very close connection with North Korea. And he actually organized one of the other students, the girl on the right, to go to North Korea in the 80s for a student gathering of communists, invited by Kim Il-sung into the bosom. They're hugging each other. And she came back. Of course, she was jailed for breaking the national security law. Even the chief of staff was jailed. But after they were released, they were welcomed by the liberals, and they entered parliament eventually. And the Im Jong-seok became the chief of staff, and Im Suk-young was a parliamentarian for many years. So this is the extent to which how the left, not just the left, but the pro-North Korean ideology, the Juche Sasang followers, have infiltrated our societies. They have infiltrated our labor unions, all sectors and industries, including the media unions, but also in particular the teachers' unions. Some of the more promising ones went into the judiciary systems, into academia to teach as professors, into government sectors and parliaments. They also meddled with our Korean history textbooks. Of course, again, they've all destroyed my presentation. Lawrence mentioned this already, but they have changed the constitution. They're trying to remove free from free democracy. So it's just a democracy. In that way, it's more amenable to what is North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But I want to point out one more very interesting and more recent development in Korean world history textbooks used in schools. They depict Christianity and its history negatively while painting the picture of Islamic civilization in a very positive light. For example, in one of the major middle school history textbooks, Islam is covered in 18 pages, while Christianity is covered in 10 pages. And the rest of the major religions, such as Buddhism and Hinduism combined, is written in 6 pages. This is a very strange thing in Korea, because it is a complete disregard of the religious demographic in Korea, where Christianity is still the majority of about 30%, followed by Buddhism, which is about 20%. The Muslim population in Korea is less than 1%. And even that 1% is comprised of migrant workers from Muslim countries. They are not Korean citizens. So this is a very strange distortion of the image of our children that they will have. And the contents are even more striking. In the 18 pages of coverage on Islamic civilization, Islam is portrayed as a great civilization that has benefited humanity. There is not a single mention of the radical Islamic terrorists or the oppression of women. In one of the pages, they say that Islamic culture of polygamy was a necessary thing and even beneficial to its society. That's the picture that says this. And even more striking is how they portrayed Christianity in this book, in this textbook that children read. They deleted the word Christianity that we use to refer to the Christian believers. They deleted it. And they replaced it with another invented term called Christgyo. It's a very unfamiliar term. If you translate it into Korean, into English, it's something like Christianology or Christianityology. Something that doesn't make sense. It's not a word on any dictionary. They invented this word, and they're using that word to describe Christianity in Korea. So that's the tactic they're using. They're just making an unfamiliar term to depict the Christian churches, the 30% of the population. And that's how they are brainwashed into thinking that Christianity and Christian civilization doesn't matter. But we all remember that it has always been about distortion and destruction of Christianity. Since the 1789 French Revolution, when Robespierre converted Christian churches into the temples of reason, through Marx-Leninism, where religion was seen as the opium of the people, to Nazi Germany, to the League of the Militant Godless under Stalin, and the '68 sex revolution in France, neo-Marxism, the hippie revolution, the LGBT movement, radical feminism, Islamic fundamentalism, the gender mainstreaming, and even North Korean Juche ideology. They have always been, at its core, about the de-Christianization of human society, about destroying the Judeo-Christian values and its Western civilization. Basically, all about destroying what is good, true, and beautiful in human history. It is the de-Christianization of the society and our culture, of our politics, and even our churches and our seminaries. So I want to show you some of the impacts that these textbooks, this indoctrination, has had on our children. The bottom left picture shows a photograph of very recent photograph. This was taken 2 days ago in Korea. And right next to this statue is the American embassy in Seoul. And they are protesting anti-Americanism. And they are portraying Kim Jong-un, the mass murderer up north. They are portraying him as a very cute, little, amenable person. And they are welcoming Kim Jong-un to come to Korea. And some are saying that if Korea is unified under the Confederate terms, and if there is an election between our current president and Kim Jong-un will definitely win. That's the extent to which the children have been brainwashed. And they're tearing up the American flag. And that leaflet says, socialism is the answer. So to put all this into perspective for you American conservatives, I ask you to think about your own 1940s and 50s and 60s for a moment. Imagine Elder Hiss and many more like him have successfully climbed up the bureaucratic ladder to the top levels of your government. Just imagine that Whittaker Chambers didn't blow the whistle on Elder Hiss and failed to win his case against him in court. Imagine that there was no William Buckley Jr. to write God and Man at Yale and found the National Review. Imagine there was no Henry Regnery to publish their great, powerful works and more. Imagine there is no conservative movement like the Intercollegiate Studies Institute and the Young Americans for Freedom. Imagine that there were no Barry Goldwater or Reagan to talk some sense into the Republican Party, which was filled with pseudo-conservatives like Rockefeller and Nelson. Now that is roughly what has happened in Korea for the last 3 decades. Substitute Elder Hiss with Moon Jae-in and the Soviet Union with North Korea and China. Except the threat is more immediate and the risk is higher because there is no ocean separating us from our revisionist enemy, which is North Korea. But now moving on to the second point I want to make, why should you care? Why should Americans care about the conservative movement in Korea? Not many of us realize this, but South Korea was and still is the only country in Asia whose political system has been exclusively modeled after the American experiment and its founding. Our founding father and president, Syngman Rhee, when he was held in prison under the Joseon dynasty, he wrote his first book in 1904 between his infamous torture sessions called The Spirit of Independence. And the only reference he had in his prison cell was a Bible and some magazines, English magazines and newspapers, which the American missionaries managed to put into his cell. He had not visited the United States at the time. But amazingly, strikingly, the conclusion he draws in his book from reading the Bible is the same conclusion drawn by Alexis Tocqueville in his Democracy in America, that the fear of God and the love of God-given freedom are the true foundations of a successful democracy. That democracy is not possible without morality, and that morality is not possible without faith in God. The Bible, after all, as your second president, John Adams, said, is the most Republican book in the world. Or as another founding father, Noah Webster, said, the Bible is the chief. I have a quote. The Bible is the chief, real source of all genuine republican principles. It teaches the equality of man as to rights and duties. While it forbids all oppression, it commands due subordination to laws and rulers. It is the surest basis of a republican government. Those who destroy the influence and authority of the Christian religion sap the foundations of public order, of liberty, and of republican government. The principle of separation of powers, representative government, non-establishment and free exercise of religion, in fact, all came from the Old Testament. So our founding president, like your founding fathers, fully understood the necessary foundation of a good republican government through the Bible and realized that such America is the true last best hope on earth. After his release from prison, he came to America to study and lived here for 39 years before he came back to Korea to be president. And when he finally returned to Korea after the liberation from Japan by the US again, he exclusively designed the political system following that of the United States, including the separation of powers into 3 branches of government. During the Constitutional Assembly, he also begins the first session of that Constitutional Assembly with a prayer, like the US did in the Continental Congress. I do not know any other country in Asia or elsewhere that is so close to the spirit of American experiment in its founding of the nation state. South Korea's freedom, of course, is also very significant to the US because of the sacrifice that you have given us to preserve the freedom from the communist invasion during the Korean War. But then again, why did America rush to save Korea immediately after the Korean War broke out? A few months before the Korean War, in fact, US actually drew the Acheson line, leaving out the Korean Peninsula. South Korea was not strategically important for the US containment strategy against the Soviet Union. Then why did the US decide so quickly to save Korea, risking confrontation with the Soviet Union? On the day of the North Korean invasion, within few hours, on June 25th, 1950, Billy Graham telegrammed President Truman. And the telegram read like this: Korea, South Korea, is the country with the largest population of Christians in Asia. We cannot let them down. These were the telegram that Truman read. And within hours, President Truman ordered General MacArthur to defend Korea. So yes, Korea is important to the US because of her sacrifice in the Korean War, and also now for the strategic reasons in today's confrontation with China. But the most important, most foundational reason why South Korea's freedom is important to the US is really a conservative one. That the Republic of Korea was founded under the same conservative principles as that of the United States. That all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator certain inalienable rights. And that South Korea is the last best hope to preserve the God-given rights against the communist tyranny in Asia. That is why I believe the Americans, especially the American conservatives, should give attention and prayer for Korea in this crucial time of crisis in free democracy. Now, as I'm closing the session on Korea, I want to wrap this up on a more hopeful note. I said in the beginning that we conservatives in South Korea did not have Russell Kirk or Whittaker Chambers or William Berkeley, Frank Mayer, Henry Regnery, but I can say emphatically that that is not the case anymore. I myself is a proud member of the Truth Forum, which is the first intercollegiate conservative organization in Korea, like the Young Americans for Freedom and the Intercollegiate Studies Institute here in the US. We are learning from your experience in the 60s and 70s in the conservative revolution to restore our founding principles, to preserve the values of individual liberty and religious faith in South Korea. Also, we have our own Regneries and Encounter, conservative publishers in Korea now. I finished translating the Reagan Conservative, The 11 Principles by Paul Kenger just last week. And they are being published by the end of this year. And I'm going to start translating The March of Freedom by Edwin Filner. And they're all lined up for translation. And I'm also writing a book on American conservatives and what we can learn from American conservative revolution in the 60s to apply it to South Korea. What we don't have is a Reagan, but there is hope that there will be. There is hope not because we are all capable and competent, but there is hope because we believe in a faithful God and His providence. So under God, let us continue to fight the good fight. Thank you, and God bless our nation.